Everything interesting that's happened in space over the past 10, maybe even 15 years is basically a result of SpaceX dropping the price of access to space by roughly 50% from historic norms. I would argue that the deployment of large-scale constellations, the rush of investment into the area, and a whole bunch of interesting things basically start with that. I knew people who were working on ideas when the Falcon 1 had not flown yet, assuming that SpaceX was going to be successful. There were early believers who just recognized the primacy, the centrality of that number, that price of access to space, that effectively functioning as a barrier for so many other things. And I want to take the time. I'm Mike Grace. I'm the CEO of Longshot. I have a kinetic launch company. If you want to find out about that, great. I would like to take today to talk to you about my theory of history. So I think that everybody with an interest in space has some kind of a vision in their head about what the future could look like, that there is a big and interesting future out there where humanity is interacting with the solar system and potentially beyond, where we have access to that. And then the multiplicative inverse of that is one in which we do not. And I think that anybody who can hold one in their head can look at the other and decide easily which of those is a more desirable future. My bachelor's degree is in economics. One of my favorite quotes, like him or love him or hate him, Friedrich Hayek. It is a curious case of economics to describe to men the limits of what they think they can design. It's basically a statement about the complexity of emergent systems as they relate to the economics in particular he was thinking of, but I actually think that it's more generally true about complex systems, including history. My bachelor's degree is in bacterial genetics. I'm a microbiologist by training there. And I worked at NASA Ames Research Center for a long time. And I ran into a lot of people in that field who were working on things along the lines of trying to puzzle out how to engineer mushrooms to grow houses on Mars. And I think a bunch of, frankly, silly things that were fundamentally a bunch of very smart people who had that vision in their head about that better future and could not imagine a way to practically make it work. And so they ended up devoting a bunch of their energy into working on technologies that were, in my opinion, putting the cart so far ahead of the horse that the horse could not even see the cart. And I think that that is an example of a flawed theory of history at work. You don't understand how you want this change to happen, but you don't really understand or have a working functional theory about how change happens in the world. So, and now I run a hypersonics startup, and I think that I run a hypersonic startup that has for as far as hard tech technology companies go, companies that are trying to lob stuff directly into space has a good chance of success. But the most likely outcome I recognize, and you all should as well, is failure. That is the most likely outcome of this. Why do that? I think that the things which are going to succeed, the things which are going to meaningfully drive humanity out into the future and into the broader solar system are going to be the result of fundamental economic incentives, as that has basically been the story of every human expansion to every corner of the earth forever, both when we are like colonizing people who are already there and going to places which have no human presence. The history of that and the history of humanity's general covering of the earth should inform what we're doing going forward. And that's always been about, I believe, pressing economic need. In my mind, the first and absolutely foremost thing we can do if we want to see that future emerge is to try and work on relatively general problems which lower the barrier to entry. Like, I think the question people are, the general questions people are asking here today about, like, trying to be slightly more useful with satellites, I think that these are good problems to address. I just want to encourage people, broadly speaking, to look at history and think about, like, what were the fundamental things which allowed for the colonization of the Americas? Like fundamental improvements in transportation technology. And I realize, of course, that that was a catastrophe from a historical perspective if you're a Native American, but there are reasonable analogies to be drawn there. And how we spend our lives and the things that we that we sacrifice for. Because like anybody who's going to try and make a technology is making a decision to make a significant sacrifice of sort of the gas that they have in their tank in terms of life and energy that you've got. I really beg you, think deeply about the necessary order of operations of those things which need to exist for that future to emerge, and be picky. Be very picky on those grounds, because what you're going to work on is, it must be the case that a very, very, very thin chance of its success justifies the investment of years of your life. I believe that's true in what I'm working on. I'm sure many people could disagree with it. But do not spend yourself frivolously. You are valuable, and your effort is valuable. And that's what I wanted to say. I'm sorry I couldn't be more entertaining. I'm normally a rollicking good time. I feel like this is almost pedantic. I apologize for that. But look to history and project forward, I think is probably the best thing I can say there. And don't trick yourself into focusing a whole life of your energy onto very, very small edge cases. Each of you has the ability to do something that deeply, deeply matters. And I've seen a lot of very brilliant people, I think, spend themselves, I would argue, on things they probably shouldn't. He said, like he knew. Thank you guys very much, and I'm really looking forward to seeing everybody else's talks. If anybody wants to talk to me about kinetic launch or doing startups, etc., I'm going to park myself on the porch here after this talk for a little while. I'm going to hang out for maybe like 20 minutes. Come talk to me, and then I'm out of here. I got to go do stuff. But thank you guys very much for the opportunity to speak, and go out there and go to space, do cool things. Thanks, guys.
Thanks. One question. Yes, over here again.
What's your cost target per kilogram to orbit, and why is it that number?
Free. So you don't make money off of launch. You make money off of in-orbit assets. Having the lowest cost of putting stuff into space is a barrier, is a moat, and an advantage for building in-space infrastructure and in-space businesses. I want to get the costs of putting stuff into space so low that I can give it away.
What's that number?
Free, like the cost. No,
the cost is never free, right? There's a simple energetic cost that's not free. So
okay. Getting it as close to as I can to the price of electricity, okay, which at scale should be, and I would actually say a much more modest scale than like $10 a kilogram. I think that the scale that Elon has to assume to get to those numbers is patently absurd. I can actually do that, and that's because I'm using a big potato gun.
And it looks like this.
Oh yeah, that's the current setup in Oakland right there. So it's about 75 feet long, and up to Mach 4.3 right now. And we actually just signed a lease on a 2-kilometer long stretch of land in the middle of nowhere, Nevada. And the plan for that is 100 kilograms to Mach 5 to Mach 10. That's the plan for the upcoming system. I just want to take that barrier. I want to make everybody else's thing going to space better. So my ideal price for putting somebody else's satellite into space is free. Give me some equity. That is the business model that I would gravitate towards for launch. But I fundamentally don't think launch is a good business. Launch is a terrible business. It should be a commodity. It should be a thing that is not a barrier. So I think that clearly SpaceX has also proven you make money in space. So their valuation is a 99% pure bet on Starlink. And I think that's correct.
If you were to analogize with like you're moving into the Americas, then would you think that like resource mining on asteroids is like kind of the next?
I think that's a $1 trillion opportunity.
Yeah.
I also think that like you think about the amount of capital equipment and fuel you will need to move to space to make that possible and feasible is huge.
That's right.
Like I think people. And this is my experience fundamentally in the frustration of working in biology.
Infrastructure in order to mine.
Yes.
Yeah.
People rely on the argument of in situ resource utilization to bootstrap an in-space economy because of the recognition that rockets can fundamentally never. You're talking about megatons of uplift to build the infrastructure necessary to make the economic case for that close. Because it's cheap to pull copper out of dirt on the Earth. So I think that the price of moving mass material to orbit must be very low for humanity to meaningfully interact with the solar system. Like, 10 tons per person per year. I'm sorry. 10 tons per person per year is what it takes to keep a Hawaiian living at a Hawaiian standard of life. That's how much is imported to those islands, and they have free air. We are talking about hundreds of tons per person on a sustained basis.
Yeah, there's not a large enough comparative advantage unless you bring the cost down substantially.
Fast.
Yeah.
It has to go super low.
Cool.
All
Interesting.
right.